move on, Mr. Gove. Mr. Murdo-Fraser, please.
Thank you, Convener. Good afternoon, Mr. Gove. Can I ask you about a different aspect of the bill, please, and the financial assistance powers that feature in Part 6 of the bill, which gives UK ministers the power to provide financial assistance in all parts of the United Kingdom and what otherwise would be devolved areas. And I wonder if you can explain to us what the thinking is behind these particular powers and how you would intend they would be used.
Yes, I think it's important to recognise that these are powers that would augment the capacity of the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government to invest in the welfare of the people of Scotland. But by its very nature, a union, the United Kingdom, or any union, is more than the sum of its parts. And there can be investment in projects which benefit all parts of the union. So, as a for instance, and I'm saying this without prejudice to future investment, we've seen how the new or revived Borders rail line has benefited the people of the Scottish Borders and Edinburgh. It would be entirely possible to conceive of a further linkage down to Carlisle or elsewhere, which would be an example of cross-union connectivity. Investment in that would mean investment in both Scotland and in England, but it would be to the benefit of both. We already have a Borderlands deal, which is one that recognises the economic integrity of the borders in lots and lots of different ways. And so it's entirely in that principle that we would seek to invest.
Okay, thank you very much. And just one follow-up question to that, Convener, if I may. We've heard some concern that what these powers will do is seek to supplant the existing Barnett formula. But what you seem to be saying is that this would be additional spending over and above the Barnett formula. The Barnett formula would be sacrosanct. You, like me, might think it's curious that there are politicians who want to rip up the Barnett formula, who are suddenly very concerned about preserving it. But perhaps you can give us a guarantee that the Barnett formula is being protected, and any spending under this head will be additional to that and not to replace it.
Totally. We're absolutely committed to the Barnett formula. It recognises that there are unique circumstances in Scotland because of history and geography that mean that the level of per capita spending in Scotland is higher, and therefore that is reflected in the block grant. That's completely unaffected. But as we've seen during the recent COVID crisis, the broad shoulders of the UK Treasury mean that we are able to provide assistance to every part of the United Kingdom on top of the Barnett formula and any Barnett consequentials.
Thank you, Convener.
Okay, we'll now go to Alec Rowley, please.
Thank you. Mr. Gove, in terms of this actual bill itself, you mentioned earlier the common frameworks. I think there was a view in Scotland that most of the objectives would be achievable through common frameworks. Therefore, the question's been asked, why is there a need for this bill when we could actually make the progress and deliver what needs to be delivered through common frameworks?
Well, common frameworks can do a lot, but they can't do everything. And one of the things that common frameworks do is that they cover certain specific sectors, whether that's food and feed or the application of the chemicals and so on. But they are sector specific. The bill provides cross-cutting support in order to ensure that Scottish businesses and Scottish individuals can have unimpeded access to the rest of the UK market. And of course, it is the case that officials in the Scottish Government are working with officials in the UK Government and other administrations because they recognise that while frameworks can do a lot, they can't do everything. There are some things which frameworks cover which are outside the scope of the market. There are some things which are market related, and then there are some other market related provisions which frameworks, sadly, don't provide the reassurance on. But I'm glad that we're making progress on frameworks without prejudice to the different views that people might take of the bill.
Yeah, okay. I think in terms of it would be good to be more specific, but around what cannot be covered by frameworks, but we can come to that. I think one of the big concerns that people have in this bill is looking to future trade bills. So in the evidence that we've taken, a good example of this was given to us, where it was around the sale of cosmetics that were tested on animals. Now, as we know just now, that is banned under EU law. But this bill could pave the way so that if there was a future trade deal done with a country that was for cosmetics, it would be excluded, because the issue is that the objection to the testing the animals is an animal welfare objection. It's not to say that the cosmetics would be a health problem. So under this paper, or under this legislation, that's an example that's been given to us where Scotland could be forced against its will to basically sell on the shelves in Scotland cosmetics that do not that are tested on animals. That's not our policy just now. So there's an example, but there's a lot of examples like that where Scotland currently has the powers. You talk about a power surge to Scotland. We currently have those powers to the EU that we would not have, and a government at UK level would have to legislate.
Let me provide you with reassurance on that. There have been all sorts of myths like these that have been put about, which are nonsense. They're stories to scare children at bedtime, not real reflections of policy. The UK government has been a world leader when it comes to animal welfare. Outside the EU, we can, for example, limit live animal exports, and we can also ban the import of fur. It's already been the case that the UK government has led not just Europe but the UK in animal welfare, introducing, for example, Lucy's Law, the law against puppy farming. We were the first jurisdiction within the United Kingdom to introduce CCTV in slaughterhouses to ensure that the end of life for animals was protected as rigorously as possible. The idea that the UK government would somehow compromise our high animal welfare standards is for the birds. And I think that there are all sorts of people who want to try to suggest that this legislation would lead to a race to the bottom. But economists will always say, look at the revealed preference. Look at how folk have acted in the past if you want to know how they'll act in the future. And this UK government, like previous UK governments, when it comes to environmental and animal welfare and other standards, has been a world leader. The other thing about the EU is, of course, within the EU, the rules are set by qualified majority voting, and outside the EU, it will be the case that the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament will have more powers than they would inside. Now, I know that there are some in Scotland who argue that an independent Scotland should seek membership of the European Union. That would see a diminution, not an expansion, of Scotland's power, sovereignty and autonomy.
But the point there is that it may be that your government has this good record on animal welfare. The point is that under this legislation, a future UK government could decide to do a trade deal with a company that they put aside these standards. You in Westminster would have the power to do that. We in Scotland would have no power to stop that. That's the problem. But given there's a lot of people wanting to come in, my final question is around, because another big concern in Scotland is around our health services and other public services. And again, it's looking to the future and looking to possible trade deals that would be done that would compromise our rights in Scotland to say that we are not putting sections of our health service, for example, into the private sector. Now, I do know that the bill says that health and social care are not part of mutual recognition and that they will be exempt. However, it's been pointed out to us by a number of witnesses that on the exclusion in Schedule 2, it's worth saying that under Clause 16.2, Secretary of State has the power to add or remove those exclusions by regulation. So again, those powers sit in Westminster to remove those exclusions for our public services, and we in Scotland and our government in Scotland would have no right or ability to stop that. Surely that's not a power surge. Surely that's a power grab.
Well, I'd say two things. First of all, it may be a lurid fantasy of some that it's the secret agenda of a government to use this as a Trojan horse to privatise parts of the NHS. But it's one of the most absurd, ludicrous and frankly irrational fantasies that I've heard in my political lifetime. The reason that we are so clear about this is because our NHS is not for sale under any circumstances. There are some people who are anxious, as I know, to spread myths about the UK government. But again, if you look at the evidence, you can see the way in which you've chosen not just to legislate, but to invest in our NHS in an unprecedented way. So I think the whole thing is ludicrous. You could theoretically say that a future Scottish Parliament could vote to abolish support for farmers. And since that's a theoretical possibility, then it's a danger. But rather than looking at these fantasies, I think it's better to look at the reality. And the reality is that Scotland's farmers and Scotland's health system are better within the United Kingdom and within the United Kingdom internal market. And nobody has yet seen or produced any evidence to suggest the contrary.
But can I just say, I'm a devolutionist, but can I say to you, it's not about you saying these governments will never do this. You're creating the legislation that will allow that to happen, and that's a key difference. And if you have no intent to see these things happen, then why create the legislation that will allow that to happen? That's why the people of Scotland are revolting en masse around these issues, and it's why you will pave the way to independence in Scotland, not the SNP, but you and your friend, the Minister.
Well, when you say people are revolting en masse, I haven't seen any evidence of that. I see that, on the front page of the National, there's, the old headline or whatever. But I don't think that this is the talk of the steamy. I don't think it's the case that people in Aberdeen or Auchtermuchty are looking at the UK Internal Market Bill and saying this is a Trojan horse to the privatisation of the NHS. If you can find such people who do say that, who are not paid up members of the SNP, I'd be very interested to hear from them. But no, this is a totally confected political myth. And the truth, of course, is that what we're doing in this legislation is protecting the internal market and maintaining high standards. The one thing that a future European Union might choose to do, were we to stay in the European Union, is alter the rules of the game in a way that we couldn't control. So leaving the European Union not only strengthens the UK's institutions, it also strengthens the capacity of the UK and the devolved administrations to protect that which is dear to us.
I'm very keen to make sure everyone gets a chance to ask the questions they want to ask. So my plea for succinct questions and answers at the beginning, can we try to make sure that's abided by, please? Angela, Constance.
I'd like to put to Mr. Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah, can you now? Yeah.
Thank you, Convener. I would like to put to Mr. Gove some of the evidence that we heard last week from Professor Michael Dugan from Liverpool University. And I quote the Professor exactly when he said that the starting assumption for the bill seems to be the regulatory divergence by Scotland and Wales as a problem. It is not seen as an expression of local democracy or a valid search for different solutions to societal problems in Scotland and Wales, but a problem that needs to be managed. That starting assumption runs throughout the bill's provision on non-discrimination and especially on mutual recognition. I wonder what Mr. Gove's response is to the Professor.
I can put the Professor's mind at rest. That is not the starting assumption of the bill.
Okay, I suspect he would have been looking for a wee bit more detail. So another quote from Professor Dugan, he says that it is fair to say that there are two main factors that are particularly striking under the United Kingdom Internal Market Bill. The first is that it is in effect a cassis de Dijon on steroids. It takes the idea of mutual recognition, multiplies and magnifies it, and makes it a far stronger principle of mutual recognition than EU lawyers would recognise in the context of the single market. Secondly, it does not acknowledge the simple empirical fact that the UK internal market is unique in the world due to the size of the English economy and population relative to the size of other participating territories. Therefore, when you put these two factors together, there is a huge impact on devolution. And Mr. Gove comment to some of the detailed users' concerns.
Again, I would take gentle issue with the Professor. It is the case that the Cassis de Dijon principle, which is at the heart of the EU single market, is one where there's a read across, which is that if something can be put legitimately on sale in one part of a single market or an internal market, then it can legitimately be put on sale in another part of it. Absolutely. But it's important to bear in mind why that's so. The UK internal market works to the benefit of every one of us. It is the case that 60% of Scotland's trade, or more than that, is with England and other parts of the UK. The Fraser-Allender Institute and others estimate that some 500,000 jobs or more depend on the unfettered access within the internal market that this legislation underpins. As we have been in the EU for 40 years, it has been single market rules that have governed the operation of the UK internal market. As we leave, we need new rules, but these new rules are such that the devolved administrations have more power than they did when we were in the EU. And that's critical. On the first point, the Internal Market Bill and indeed the position of the UK government overall is that devolution gives us the best of both worlds, both access to that internal market for every part of the United Kingdom, but also the Scottish Parliament and other devolved administrations legislating in the areas that are important to them. So whether that's on higher education funding, minimum pricing for alcohol, or the plastic bag charge, or whatever it might be, we welcome the innovation that devolved administrations show.
And would it be the case that if, for example, if the Scottish Government were minded to introduce a ban on, say, single-use plastics, that under this bill, that the Scottish authorities could indeed introduce such a ban and enforce it against Scottish producers, but would the problem be that they could not enforce it against imported goods from England or Wales?
Well, we'd have to look at what the legislation said, but if it were the case, for the sake of argument, that in Scotland that there were certain goods that were banned, then it would be the case that whether they were Scottish or English manufacturers, they'd be banned in that jurisdiction.
Okay, I think that's quite revealing. I'll leave it there just now, Convener. Thank you.